Most people don't even realize they're shrinking. They wake up every day playing a smaller version of who they could be, hiding their fire, their strength, their intelligence, because they're scared of being seen. But deep down, you know you're meant for more. You can feel it. And the only thing standing between who you are and who you want to become is the part of you that keeps playing small. Today's message is simple. It's time to stop shrinking and step into the life you were built for. Step one, you are shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. You don't wake up one morning and consciously decide to shrink yourself. It happens slowly, almost quietly, through years of subtle conditioning. You learn to speak softer, even when your voice is clear. You learn to take up less space, even when your presence is needed. You learn to hold back your ideas, your ambition, your potential, because somewhere along the way, you were made to believe that being fully yourself was too much, too loud, too intense, too honest, too different. And the worst part is that you start believing that shrinking is the safer option. It becomes the survival pattern you slip into without thinking, the pattern that makes you second guess every instinct you have. You convince yourself that if you minimize your needs, your dreams, your intelligence, the world will find you easier to accept. But all it really does is teach you how to disappear in slow motion. This shrinking doesn't come from weakness, it comes from learned protection. Maybe it started the first time you shared something you were excited about and someone made you feel foolish for wanting it. Maybe it began when you tried to shine, but someone close to you felt threatened by your brightness and made you dim it. Or maybe you grew up in an environment where blending in was safer than standing out. Over time, you learn to edit yourself, to adjust your tone, to act less capable than you actually are, because being fully expressed created friction with people who didn't have the capacity to handle your bigness. And so you clipped your own wings to keep them comfortable. You lowered your standards to make them feel adequate. You softened your edges so they wouldn't feel insecure. The tragic part is that you didn't realize the cost. It was your identity, slowly dissolving into something unrecognizable. You notice this pattern in the smallest moments. You're careful with your words because you don't want others to think you're challenging them. You downplay your achievements because you don't want them to think you're bragging. You silence your opinions because you don't want them to feel offended. You pretend you don't know the answer even when you do. You pretend you're fine with less even when you want more. And each time you do this, you disconnect from the truth of who you are. You become a softened, diluted version of yourself that exists only to maintain a false sense of harmony with people who would rather see you small than see themselves reflected in your growth. You learn that it's easier to stay quiet than to risk being misunderstood, easier to stay average than to risk being judged, easier to keep your head down than to show people what you're truly capable of. And so shrinking becomes not just a behavior, but a belief system that tells you fitting in is better than being free. But somewhere deep inside, a part of you knows this isn't who you're meant to be. You feel the tension between the life you're living and the life you were built for. You feel the frustration of hiding parts of yourself that are supposed to lead you forward. You feel the heaviness of carrying potential that has never been fully expressed. You feel the quiet ache that comes from pretending to be smaller than you are, hoping it will protect you from the discomfort of being fully seen. And, even if you haven't said it out loud yet, that shrinking yourself has never made your life easier. It has only made it emptier. Step two, your environment is conditioning you to stay small. You don't realize how deeply your environment shapes you until you step back and look at the patterns you've been living in for years. Most people assume their limitations come from within, that their lack of progress is because they're not disciplined enough or confident enough, but the truth is often far more subtle. You've been conditioned to stay small by the people, places, and routines that surround you. When you grow up or live in an environment where ambition is mocked, where dreaming is considered unrealistic, or where breaking the pattern is treated as a threat, you begin to internalize the idea that being mediocre is safer than being exceptional. You learn not to aim too high because it makes others uncomfortable. You learn not to think too big because it disrupts the unspoken rules of the group. The world around you quietly shapes you into someone who doesn't question the limits, someone who goes with the flow even when the flow is pulling you away from who you're meant to become. Sometimes this conditioning comes from the people closest to you. When friends or family members have settled in their own lives, they don't always know how to support someone who wants more. They project their fears onto you, masking it as concern. They tell you not to take risks because they never learned how to. They tell you to be realistic because they were punished for wanting more than what they were given. And even though they may love you, their influence is heavy. Their expectations become invisible walls around your potential. You start absorbing their beliefs as your own, believing that opportunities are rare, that change is risky, that dreams are dangerous. You become loyal to their comfort, even when it requires abandoning your own growth. Without realizing it, you begin to shrink your goals to match the limitations of the environment you inhabit, forgetting that the cage is not made of steel, but of ideas. Other times, it's not even people, it's routine. It's the habits you repeat every day that reinforce a version of you that feels familiar but unfulfilled. You wake up at the same time, go to the same places, engage in the same conversations, consume the same content, and before long, your life becomes a loop. And loops don't create growth, they create stagnation. The routine becomes a comfortable trap. It tells your brain, this is who you are, this is all you need, this is enough, even when every part of you knows it's not. When you live the same day repeatedly, your environment becomes a teacher, and its lesson is that staying the same is easier than evolving. Eventually, your mind stops imagining what could be because it's too busy maintaining what already is. And then there is the culture, the larger environment that surrounds you beyond your immediate life. Society often rewards conformity more than individuality. It praises the predictable and questions the bold. It tells you to prioritize stability even when it suffocates you. The expectations are everywhere. Follow the norms, don't stand out, don't challenge the system, don't make people uncomfortable with your growth. You don't even notice how deeply these messages sink in until you try to break away from them. The moment you attempt to rise, you feel resistance, not just from others, but from the internal programming created by years of subtle conditioning. It's the mental friction that whispers, stay where you are, don't disrupt your environment, don't outgrow what feels familiar. Step 3, your dreams require you to outgrow your current identity. Most people believe their dreams are far away because of time, luck, or opportunity. But the truth is much more personal. Your dreams require a version of you that you haven't become yet. They don't align with who you are today. They align with who you must grow into. And that's the part that scares people. Growth demands identity change. It demands letting go of your old story, your old habits, your old limitations, and especially your old excuses. You can't step into a bigger life while holding on to the smaller identity that kept you comfortable. You can't build a stronger future while clinging to the patterns that kept you safe in the past. Your dreams pull you forward, but the identity you currently live inside pulls you back, and this internal tug of war becomes the silent battle that shapes your entire life. Your current identity is built from every experience you've had, your fears, your successes, your failures, the things people told you, the things you learned to believe about yourself. If you grew up being criticized, you developed an identity that avoids risk. If you were punished for trying, you built an identity that stays quiet. If you were rewarded for playing small, you built an identity that hides your ambition. This identity isn't you. It's a survival mechanism shaped by your past. Your dreams, however, don't care about that old identity. They demand courage when your current self is scared. They demand discipline when your current self is lazy. They demand self-belief when your current self doubts everything. They demand vision when your current self only sees what's familiar. And this is why your dreams feel so far away, not because they are impossible, but because the version of you trying to reach them is too limited to hold them. To outgrow your current identity, you have to confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The parts that stay in denial, the parts that choose distraction over responsibility, the parts that cling to old habits because they feel safe, even when they keep you stuck. Growth requires dismantling the mental patterns that feel comfortable, even when they no longer serve you. You have to question the story you keep repeating about who you are, the story that says you're not ready, the story that says you're not capable, the story that says you should wait or that you don't have what it takes. These stories are not truths. They're leftovers from moments in your life that hurt you, moments that shaped you, moments that taught you to stay within boundaries that no longer match the life you want. Your dreams demand that you rewrite those stories, even if that means facing parts of yourself that you've spent years trying not to look at. When people say, you need to become the best version of yourself, it sounds like a motivational cliche, but it's actually deeply practical. Your dreams have weight, responsibility, and consequences. A bigger life brings bigger pressure, bigger expectations, and bigger demands. The person you are today might crumble under the weight of the life you want, not because you're incapable, but because you haven't grown into the identity that can carry it. Your dreams are not waiting on time, they're waiting on transformation. They require a version of you who can make decisions without fear, who can act without hesitation, who can hold discomfort without collapsing, who can commit fully without sabotaging the process. Your dreams require you to rise into someone with the strength, clarity, and emotional stability to hold the life you keep imagining silently in the back of your mind. Step 4. Self-doubt is not truth, it's trauma echoing back. Self-doubt doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's not a natural part of who you are, even though it feels like it. It's not evidence that you're incapable or unworthy. It's a voice created by past experiences, moments where you were dismissed, ignored, judged, or wounded. These moments embed themselves deep in your mind, and over time, they begin to echo back as hesitation, insecurity, and fear. When you doubt yourself today, you're not responding to the present. You're responding to a memory. You're responding to an emotional imprint that convinced you at some point in your life that playing small was safer than taking risks, that being quiet was safer than speaking up, and that staying unseen was safer than being visible. Self-doubt is not the truth. It's an old survival mechanism trying to protect you from pain you've already lived through, not pain that is actually happening now. Most people underestimate how deeply trauma shapes their internal dialogue. Trauma isn't always some catastrophic event. Sometimes it's repeated criticism from a parent, a teacher who embarrassed you, a friend who betrayed you, or a moment where you tried and failed in a way that left you scarred. Emotional wounds come in many forms, and each one teaches your nervous system something about danger. If you were told you weren't good enough, your mind learned to question your worth. If you were punished for expressing yourself, your mind learned to stay silent. If you were made fun of for being confident, your mind learned to shrink. These patterns become part of your identity, and because they've been with you for so long, they feel like truth. But they aren't truth. They're protective adaptations created in environments where you didn't feel safe to be fully yourself. Self-doubt shows up the strongest when you're about to grow. When you're on the edge of something important, something meaningful, something that requires a level of courage you haven't practiced yet. Suddenly your mind floods with old fears, old stories, old memories that tell you to stop. It whispers, you can't do this, you're not ready, you're not capable. But that's not your intuition speaking. That's your past. That's the emotional muscle memory of every moment in your life where you felt small, unprepared, or powerless. The brain isn't trying to stop you from succeeding. It's trying to prevent you from feeling the pain you once felt. The problem is that trauma can't see the difference between danger and discomfort. Growth feels uncomfortable, so your mind mistakes it for danger, and you interpret that discomfort as a sign that you're not enough. But discomfort is not danger, and doubt is not truth. If you really look at your self-doubt, you'll notice that the voice doesn't sound like you at all. It sounds like someone else from your past, a parent, a partner, a teacher, a friend, a failure, a moment where you were judged or misunderstood. That voice doesn't reflect your potential. It reflects the emotional imprint of someone else's opinion or a version of yourself that existed in a moment when you didn't have the strength, clarity, or stability that you have now. Self-doubt is simply an echo, a repetition of the moments that once broke you or shaped you, replaying themselves because your mind thinks it's protecting you. But echoes aren't real. They're just reminders of where you've been, not indicators of where you can go. Step 5. Playing small has a hidden cost. Regret. People often convince themselves that playing small is harmless, that it's a temporary pause, a season of comfort, or a way to avoid conflict and disappointment. They tell themselves that shrinking for now won't matter later, that staying safe is the responsible choice, that settling just for a little while won't have any long-term consequences. But what most people don't realize is that playing small carries a cost far heavier than fear, discomfort, or temporary uncertainty. The real cost is regret, slow, creeping, invisible at first, and devastating when it finally arrives. You don't notice regret building. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It grows quietly inside you, accumulating piece by piece every time you deny your potential, silence your voice, or walk away from something you know you were meant to pursue. At first, it feels like nothing. Then it feels like restlessness. Then, over time, it feels like a permanent ache, a sense of life slipping through your fingers because you kept choosing comfort over courage. Regret is not created by failure, it's created by avoidance. You don't regret the risks you took or the dreams you chased. You regret the moments you backed away from who you could have become. When you play small, you think you're protecting yourself from pain, but all you're doing is delaying a different kind of pain, one that lasts much longer. The pain of wondering what might have happened if you had been brave enough to try. The pain of knowing you had the talent, the strength, the intelligence, and the potential, but you didn't give yourself permission to use it. The pain of looking back years later and realizing that the only thing you were ever missing was belief. People fear failure, but they underestimate the emotional weight of unrealized potential. They underestimate how heavy it feels to carry dreams that were never brought to life simply because they were too afraid of being uncomfortable in the present moment. When you choose to play small, you create a life built around avoiding discomfort, but in doing so, you also avoid growth. You avoid the experiences that would have shaped you into someone stronger and more capable. You avoid the opportunities that would have expanded your identity and your confidence. You avoid the challenges that would have taught you resilience and clarity. And without those experiences, you stay stuck inside the same emotional and mental patterns, growing older, but not growing deeper. As time passes, you begin to notice the gap between who you are and who you were meant to be. That gap is where regret grows. Regret isn't loud, it's quiet and steady and persistent. It whispers reminders of the dreams you abandoned. It reminds you of the moments you hesitated when you should have stepped forward. It reminds you of how much of your life was shaped not by your desires, but by your fears. Eventually, regret becomes a weight you carry everywhere. It sits in your thoughts, in your decisions, in the way you see yourself. It makes you question not just your past, but your identity. You start wondering whether you wasted years of your life playing small because you didn't trust your own potential. You start realizing that the comfort you protected yourself with wasn't comfort at all. It was limitation disguised as safety. And by the time you understand the cost of playing small, the years have already passed, the opportunities have already faded, and you're left with the quiet realization that the life you wanted was never out of reach. It was just waiting for you to stop shrinking long enough to claim it. Step 6. You must choose expansion over approval. One of the hardest truths to accept is that not everyone is meant to understand your growth, and not everyone will applaud it. Human beings are wired to seek approval. It's a survival instinct, a psychological imprint from childhood, a learned behavior that tells us belonging equals safety. But as you get older, this instinct can become a trap. You start shaping your decisions around what keeps you accepted rather than what moves you forward. You start filtering your dreams through the lens of what others might think instead of what you truly want. Approval becomes a quiet prison, one you don't even recognize because it feels familiar, comfortable, and socially rewarded. Yet the moment you start choosing approval over expansion, you begin abandoning parts of yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold your full potential. People who seek approval learn to shrink their personality, their ambition, their curiosity, and even their identity just to avoid conflict or discomfort. You learn not to speak up when you should. You learn to downplay your goals because they intimidate others. You learn to pretend you don't want more because wanting more makes people uncomfortable. Instead of outgrowing your environment, you try to earn validation from it. Instead of building the life you want, you settle into the life people expect of you. This constant self-editing is exhausting, and yet it becomes the default for so many. It's not because you lack courage, but because approval feels like a shortcut to belonging. The problem is that belonging built on self-abandonment is never real. You end up surrounded by people who love the version of you that fits their comfort, not the version of you that represents your truth. Expansion, on the other hand, requires a completely different kind of strength. It demands that you prioritize your growth even when it challenges the expectations others have placed on you. Expansion is uncomfortable, unpredictable, and often lonely because you're stepping out of the emotional contracts you made with people who benefited from your smallness. When you choose expansion, you break the unspoken rules, rules that say you must stay the same for the sake of consistency, or that you shouldn't surpass the people who came before you, or that your dreams should be filtered through what others believe is realistic. Expansion asks you to choose your future over your past, even if that means disappointing people who are attached to who you used to be. It asks you to trust your inner voice over external validation. It asks you to outgrow the identity that earned approval and step into the identity that earns self-respect. At some point, you have to decide whether your life belongs to you or to the opinions of the people around you. Approval can feel addictive because it gives you quick emotional rewards, praise, acceptance, reassurance, but it also keeps you stuck in cycles that don't align with your higher purpose. Expansion gives you the opposite: slow, steady, uncomfortable growth that eventually leads to alignment, strength, and authenticity. But to choose expansion, you must be willing to let go of the emotional safety net that approval provides. You must be willing to be misunderstood, judged, or even distanced from people who prefer the older, smaller version of you. You must be willing to prioritize your evolution over the temporary comfort of being liked. Growth comes with a cost, but the cost of not growing is far heavier. At some point, you stop asking for permission and start choosing the life that was always waiting for you underneath the fear of not being accepted. You don't have to keep shrinking to fit into places you've outgrown. This is your moment to choose growth over approval, expansion over fear. Stop waiting for permission to become who you already know you can be. The life you want begins the second you decide to stop playing small.